going to have a wonderfully fun and engaging interactive presentation about identifying your product with Chad Beier and Jeff Bubolz.
All right, thanks. Everyone can hear us? Good on the mics?
Can you hear us?
Seeing head nods, awesome.
So let's do introductions. Let's start off there. We should like flip sides because of where the drawings are. This is Chad Beier. He is a professional Scrum trainer, Scrum.org, owns his own consulting company, Whiteboard Consulting, has lots of experience going in and helping organizations transform their organization and to take the next step on organizational agility. Great all-around good guy, bolt rocker, challenges organizations to take that next step and continuous learning.
Thanks, Jeff. This is Jeff Bubolz, my partner in crime. He's also running his own company, humaneconsulting.org. Jeff and I talk daily. We kind of nudge each other, coach each other, always pushing each other to do a little bit more than what our current status quo is. Professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. Yeah, he's a bolt rocker too. He says I'm a bolt rocker. He likes to drive change. So, yeah, I'm sure I missed something.
Agile Wire. So
that's you.
I have a podcast called Agile Wire. So if you like what we're saying, you can download that on the App Store, Google Play, Spotify, iTunes. Chad's been on there as a guest, many other great guests, so check that out if you want to learn more.
All right, so
start where we normally start.
This makes conference organizers really uncomfortable when they're like, hey, do you have your PowerPoint deck yet? Hey, do you have your PowerPoint deck yet? Do you have a PowerPoint? And well, this is what we have today. We have an outline, but it's all up here, so no worries. It's like a set list. So we're gonna use the iPad today as a virtual whiteboard, live up to the reputation of a company named Whiteboard Consulting, I guess. And we're gonna make this as interactive as possible. The thing I like about not having PowerPoint is we can take this wherever we wanna go. So you don't have microphones, but I'm hoping if you shout at us a little bit, we'll be able to hear what you have to say. So, what's my product? How to rationalize demand and delivery. To start, we probably should start with maybe talking about what we mean by product.
Yeah.
But before we get there, hold that thought. Because we like to talk about how many people have heard the word agile before? Okay, how many people care about that word agile in your day-to-day, what you're working on? Like, does it matter? Okay, so maybe not. That's interesting. We've heard about it, but we don't really care about it that much. We like to kick this off and really dive into what is agile. So almost every talk we start this way. So what is agile? What are some words that come to mind?
Oh, the crowd. Iterative?
Iterative.
Yep. What else? Flexible. Working software. Great. Value driven. Transparency. Like it. Feedback. What else? You can get more. Quality. Speed. Interactions. All right. Communication. Pretty good list.
We could probably keep going. Like, we could maybe burn the 45 minutes of the talk, like just doing this. We could fill up the whole sheets. So, would you agree at this point that agile in 2019 has become somewhat of an overloaded word? Yeah, it can mean a lot of different things in different contexts. So what we see a lot of times is two people in a conversation talking about agile, and what I have in my head, what I mean agile is not what Jeff has in his head. So we're just talking past each other sometimes. So the reason we like to do this exercise is to kind of surface the fact that there is a lot of ambiguity around the definition of what that word means today. And then we like to go back to maybe the original Agile Manifesto and where this word came from.
Yeah, so 2001, a bunch of developers got together, most of them were consultants at the time, and they said, hey, we're doing these lightweight frameworks, very different than this heavy waterfall, RUP type processes. We should call it something. What are we going to call these things? It was extreme programming, Scrum, Crystal at the time, different things like that. And three words they came up with were agile, responsive, and adaptive. And they were going between the three of them. And they said, you know, we really like this word adaptive, and I actually really like this word too. But we can't really pick this. There's this guy here, his name's Jim Highsmith, and he's got this book with the word adaptive in it. And he's got a consulting company with the word adaptive in it. And if we pick that word, Jim's gonna get all the business, and so that's not gonna be cool. So let's pick something different. And so they went with agile. Now, when we think agile, a lot of times people think of this as doing something. They're doing agile, they're doing some events, they're doing Scrum, they're doing extreme programming, they're doing whatever it is. And we like to flip that to the word agility. Because you can't say that I do agility. Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense in the sentence, right? It's something that you really just are, or you're being, right? And so we think of agility, we think of responsive, adaptive. Maybe we're not talking past each other anymore. We're centralizing on what that really actually means.
So, if you answered the question earlier, you said you know Agile, but you don't care about it that much. So I'm still going to ask that question. So why do we want agility?
Why do you want that as an organization or individual? Okay.
Changing customer needs. Okay.
What else? Yeah. Okay. Validating product delivery, maybe? Okay. Eliminate waste. Okay. Keep up with the competition.
Okay. All right. So how about so have you heard of story of Copernicus and Galileo? Are you prepared to tell this, Jeff?
Sure, I can tell it. All right. So Copernicus, this is like the 1400s. He wanted to change. He had this idea. He's like, everyone at the time thought the Earth was at the center and everything else rotated around that in the universe. And he's like, no, actually it's the other way. The Earth's on the outside, sun's in the center, and it rotates around, the Earth rotates around the sun. Very contradictory at the time. It kind of changed the way people perceived the universe at that time. All right, so that was one thought. Same thing kind of happened within product development. So it was back in like the 60s and 70s, Peter Drucker said that, hey, I know everyone thinks right now that organizations are at the center and customers kind of go around them and we kind of control what happens. But I think it's the other way. I think customers are in the middle and organizations rotate around them and people have a lot more choices and they really drive the demand. And this was very contradictory at the time because too often it was shareholder value was the most important thing. And so this was just like Copernicus, like looked down on and maybe even feared and very debatable over time. But I think that's really changing now in present day. So we have this story, right, that we want to share. Is that want to jump into the round table?
Yeah. So familiar with the round table? Round table is 190 some large companies and CEOs that sit on those, that lead those companies. And so just recently, in August, anyone here heard this? Jamie Dimon, he spoke at the round table and talked
Jamie
about
Dimon, for those who don't know,
CEO of JP Morgan Chase. He basically made an announcement that this idea from 1970s, Milton Friedman, that shareholder value is the existence of the firm, okay? He basically said, we might have had it wrong for the last several decades. And they didn't exactly say what they want to focus on, but they made it clear that shareholder value and this obsession with short-term thinking to hit quarterly earning targets for shareholders has got to change. And they mentioned customers, employees, community,
the environment.
So they mentioned other things that are a bit more healthy and holistic to focus on.
Yep.
Whether you like Elon Musk or not, he's one of those CEOs who has also challenged this in recent years. I think it was 2018 where he was basically on a call, and I'm sure he got in trouble for all this and had to pay some fines and deal with his PR. But he said something along the lines of, I don't care if you invest in Tesla. Like, if you don't want to invest in us, don't invest in us, right? Like, we're not in existence to satisfy day traders. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of that. And again, I think that's bold from CEOs to say things like, yeah, there's a deeper purpose behind our organization. Shareholder value is important, but you can choose not to invest in us. It's interesting. I'm curious to see what the startup pitch people who attended that would think about all this. But so anyway, what we're focusing on is this shift in 2019 and beyond, and we've been here for probably a decade at least since the internet age, of customer in the center, trying to point to where the whiteboards are, customer in the center, and really the orgs are competing and collaborating, co-opetition around those customers potentially. So
what does that matter? Well, it matters because we're thinking about, when we define our product, what do you want to optimize for? And so we just gave you something of like, hey, should we optimize for customer value? Some people might have been debating that and said, no, it's shareholder value, or it's owner value, or whatever. So we would argue that we want to optimize for customer value. That's going to feed everything else. Others thoughts? Anyone want to? All right, so customer value, right? So that one might be one thing to optimize for. What else might you want to optimize for in your system? If you're going to define your product, what do you want your product to be great at? Anyone ever think about this with their current products? If I'm a government organization, I might want to optimize for security or secrecy. I might not want to leak that out. That might be what I want to optimize for. If I'm Amazon, it might be customers, like we just talked about. It might be time to market. Anything else? What other things might you want to optimize for? What's that? Employee satisfaction. Okay. What else? Consumer engagement. Okay.
in the back, I saw someone. What's that? Scalable, to be scalable. That's interesting. I think we're gonna hit on that a little later and see what you mean by scalable, or maybe what we mean by scalable. Okay, so we kicked this all off with agile and agility really being held up by responsiveness and adaptiveness. So from this point forward, most of our talk is focused on an organization that is really seeking adaptiveness and responsiveness in the marketplace today. And this is why we've all heard of the word agile, because so many CIOs across the land are like, hey, we have to go agile. We gotta be able to respond to change and beat our competitors, what we talked about earlier. So from this point forward, we're gonna really be focusing on how would you structure your organization or your product definition to be agile, right? To demonstrate a level of adaptiveness and responsiveness.
So if we ever get questions like, well, I want predictability, or I want secrecy, or I want something else there, we'd say that's a whole different model than what we're talking about today. We're talking about if you have a product, we're going for adaptiveness, responsiveness, and high value delivery. That's what we're optimizing for in the system we're going to talk about.
So what would that look like from a product definition?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
There's really two ends of the spectrum we can break this down to. A narrow product definition or a broad product definition. How many people have worked in technology or IT departments or some form of, like, you're building a product that has a software or technology component? Okay, good.
Everybody.
Good. And how many people have worked in organizations where you have several departments that are or you have an org chart structured around several departments and maybe different areas? Okay, good. Good. Because if we were all just like, yeah, we're single team Scrum in a startup company, this might be like, why am I here? Like, I don't get why you're defining a product. Well, you know what our product is. Okay, so narrow versus broad. What do we mean by that?
So let's give an example of that. So let's take an easy one we can all understand, Microsoft. And we could define our product in multiple different ways for Microsoft. We could say our product is Office 365, or we could say our product is Word, Excel, Access, Teams, Yammer, all OneNote, all the things that are part of Office 365. Now, if I take that more narrow approach, and I take all those, Word, Excel, Access, and all of a sudden, Atlassian comes in and they say, hey, we have this new thing in HipChat, it's amazing, and they're stealing everybody to go over there, and they're not using Teams anymore, and they're starting to use Atlassian's product. and I've funded this thing. I've got one team or couple teams working on teams. What can I do? How can I respond to change in the marketplace? I can't. Maybe I got a bunch of teams working on Access and Excel and things like that. Hey, no one's using Access anymore. Or we've got Word and PowerPoint pretty much where they want to be. We don't need to add that many new features there. But we can't move those teams over because they don't know about the code base. They're not collaborating, with that team. They're not up to speed on what it would take to actually move over to this Teams application, right? And so it limits our adaptability. We can't really respond to change in an environment like that. We're very focused on what the narrow thing is. So there's pros and cons. The pro is everybody gets something over in the individual application model that we were talking about before. The con is you can't adapt to change. The pro over in the broad is like we can move people around, but some people aren't going to get everything. So we might just not release features in certain areas for an extended period of time, but hopefully working on the highest valuable stuff. So which way do you want it? You have to make some trade-offs there. So what we're saying here is there's not a right and a wrong on the broad or narrow, but there are definite trade-offs, and you need to figure out what you want to optimize for and what's important for your organization, because these are business decisions you really need to think about.
And so what Jeff's describing there, just to make a visual for people who aren't seeing what he was describing, imagine if you had a narrow definition of Excel, Word, and Access. I'm laughing because Access is do we talk about Access anymore? I don't know. Is it a thing? I used to remember programming things and it was painful. So if you were structured that way, each team might have their list of work that they work from, right? That little backlog. And then that circle is a team. The Excel team, the Word team, the Access team. So that because a narrow product definition, a feature that would sweep across all of those would require all those teams to coordinate. And there might be a lot of dependencies on those lists across those backlogs, right? And it might be painful. But if we had one list, and we called our product Microsoft Office, and then everything else was just teams underneath that all worked from that same list. That's what we're talking about when we say broad versus product definition, or broad versus narrow product definition. So there's still the same number of people potentially, still the same number of teams, but we're talking about collapsing those lists. So what this looks like in sort of a causal relationship map is if we define narrow product definitions, that's going to lead to a larger number of lists. I didn't ask Scrum yet, did I? How many people have used or Scrum in some form in there? Okay, good. So we have a lot of people with Scrum. So this would be called a product backlog in Scrum. Careful with that word product, because we might not have a product here yet. We might just have a list. But if we have narrow, we have a large number of lists, right? Back here we've got, oops, trying to go back. We have 3 versus 1, okay? So there's more lists the more narrow we have. So what is that? What is some of the pain that you've felt? I mean, I have a list of things that we could feed here, but what are some things that you've experienced when you have a lot of large dependencies and coordination across the organization? Yes?
Priority.
Multiple number one problem, right?
Yes.
The most common thing. Okay, great. So we have conflicting priorities.
What else? What does that lead to? Or maybe off the list could lead to the same thing.
One of the problems with multiple teams, having different priorities because different lists on different teams.
Right, so there's different priorities, different lists on different teams, and that leads to what? Chaos?
Yeah.
Building the wrong stuff?
Wrong stuff.
Maybe building everything all at once, right? So distributed focus, no focus, lots of whip in the organization.
Coordination pain, I'll describe there, and yeah, whip.
Maybe
work in
instead
process.
of working on 5-10 things, we're working on hundreds of things at the same time in many organizations. Okay. And then that leads to maybe dependencies, right? And then we got a more coordination pain because of that. And because you have all that stuff, like what's the impact to your time to market? Long time, right? It accelerates. It's very, very long cycle times.
So, you filled in part of that. We threw some things in there. Is this agile? Is this responsive to customer demands? Is this adaptive to competitors beating us to market? based on our observations, mostly no. I guess in a world you could be really good at managing all of this, but all the evidence that we've seen, this is as chaotic as it sounds based on our experiences. You guys filled it in. So what can we do about this? What's the answer? Well, what if we go broad on this then?
Yeah. So we got a broad product definition. That means we have less lists. We've combined many of those lists together. So what's the impact of that? What might we see? I think we have lists put together. We are going to get to this part next, but we got teams that can work on any of the items that are on those lists. We have problem-solving teams. What does that lead to now?
Clarity of what you're trying to work on.
So priority, yep. We have clear priorities, and probably clear work in progress, right? Like we know we're going to limit that to just the high value things that are in few of those things for each of the teams. Okay.
Does everyone understand why there's less WIP, less work in process? Because if you're all pulling from one backlog, you can't just, I'm going to decide to work on item 300. But when you have 5 backlogs, everyone's working on their number 1, so everyone's starting a lot of work at once instead of collaborating on getting one piece out the door. What else? More expertise. So there's an increase of skill set across the ecosystem. Yeah. I mean, imagine if I was only on the Excel team, and then all of a sudden on Monday I'm on Microsoft Office team, and the top of the backlog just has a ton of Access work coming up. I have some options. I can leave the company. Hopefully I don't get fired, or I can decide to learn that skill because that's what the organization demands right now. Right? Back to adaptiveness. When you have a lot of lists, you get a lot of work trapped inside of your delivery systems, and you can't respond quickly. But when you have clarity, as you said, at the top of the list, you're almost baking into your DNA. You're forcing a learning culture because there's nowhere to hide. Like, I'm supposed to work on what's on the Office list. So we'll say increase skills and learning.
What else might happen? Yeah.
Yep.
You think it increases dependencies or
decreases?
Decreases.
You said decreased dependencies.
Yep, definitely.
So we're saying decrease, right? Are we saying that all of the coordination and dependencies go away? No. Those still occur, right? But who's doing them? Let me go back a few.
Yeah. If we go to that one, like
right here. So let's say we had, I'm going to put in quotes, POs here, product owners. And then over here we have a product owner. So who is managing the dependencies and coordination on the left side where we have narrow product definition? Well, it's not the Scrum Master's job. The Scrum Master is there to help explain Scrum and maximize the benefit of the framework of Scrum and help them get the benefit. He's testing me here, I think. Really what this does is it puts it on the PO's hands to say, I can't get, what we're working on this iteration, this sprint, I can't get done because the team over here has something tied up that I'm depending on, right? Now, this is where maybe the Microsoft Excel and Access doesn't tie very closely.
Well, it could be the toolbar that's shared between the two of them. And we need to get this feature out, but we can't put the button on there to finish it. We have everything done, and I'm waiting on the Word team to finish something up for the Excel team. So they can do the next part.
So there's that wait time. And the product owners are like, why is this my problem, right? So they're doing a bit more project management of managing dependencies and coordination across these lists here, right? Right here. If we put one decision maker and a product owner above the Office suite, they've got a lot to decide on, right, what comes next. But who do we have deal with all that dependencies and coordination work? The development teams, the people doing the work on these teams. I don't know, here, I'll make it more clear. There's people here.
And then we got people just talking to people to solve the problem, right? Like, it's like we don't have to have this third party and this telephone game going on. It's just like developer A talks to developer B and says, hey, I need this and you've got this and this sucks for me because I can't finish my work. How do we get around this? And they just talk and they figure out a way around it, right? Like, that's where we're pushing that coordination down, is to the people actually doing the work.
So that's going to shorten the time, and it's going to increase the responsiveness across those team members. But does that solve everything? So all we're talking about is product definition here. So if you ignore the bottom half of this, we're talking about this right now. So just by collapsing your lists into a broader product definition, does that solve all the pain that we described? It begins to help with this, but there's still a component, a key component inside of anything Agile or Scrum that is critical. What is that?
What's the thing we need next?
Blank slate. What is that? I mean, we've been sort of dancing around it, but if you don't consider this, if you don't do this, teams will struggle. Hint: teams will struggle to be able to work from one large list. So what is this? You need what? What's that?
Planning. We're thinking more like, what type of teams do we need?
Team structure. What do we need? Self-organizing is great, yes.
It's good.
Cross-functional. So we need cross-functional teams. If we don't have this, I have not seen how agility is going to be unlocked if we don't have cross-functional teams. I mean, again, there's going to be some examples where maybe you have a small team and you don't even think about a cross-functional team because you've had it from the beginning. Anyone been in a situation where there's like a major outage in your area, production support issue, like your website's down and like everything's melting down? What do we do? What do we do in those situations? You get in a war room.
Yes.
And then who do we get in the war room? Probably. So do we just say, we send an email out to the whole company and say, everyone who can solve this problem? What do we normally do? We run around to the team areas, the departments, and we grab usually an expert, subject matter expert, that person who's been there for 20 years, they know the system inside out. And then what? We get them all in that room and we solve the problem as quick as possible.
But do we work on many different things? I mean, we got a lot of work to do. Like, should we, Chad's going over there, he's looking into a service and an issue there, and I'm really great on the databases, so I maybe should go be tuning a different database or something during that time, right? Like, is that how we handle it? Not generally, right? Like, normally it's like, no, you're looking at that, I'm looking at something in the same area, we're pairing, we're looking at the same stuff, we're investigating it together. So, cross-functional teams in a war room situation inherently limit their work in progress to that single most important item. And then what happens to our cycle time, hopefully? The time from when we start that to go down. Yeah, it goes really low, and we deliver something really quickly. And then what do we do once that problem's solved? Yeah, send everybody back to their department.
Because it's not efficient to work inside this war room. So let's go back to our departments and get back to work on our large projects of portfolios. So why do we? It's okay. So it's very intuitive. We know this because we do this by default when there's an emergency. And I'm still scratching my head in 2019 why organizational structure has not changed more than it has and gotten this, right? That we should be working this way all the time. And again, this is what Scrum demands. That's why it talks about self-organizing cross-functional teams. And if we miss that, if we say, we go to a training class, or maybe we just look at the Scrum guide and we're like, we can do this, and we start putting Scrum on top of our existing team structure, that's probably not gonna work very well. And then we're gonna say things like, yeah, Scrum's a fad, that doesn't work. Well, it does, but we've missed the core of what makes it work. The core of agility is cross-functional teams. I mean, period. I mean, there's some more stuff that's important, but if you don't have that, you're gonna be missing out on a lot of opportunities. So how are we doing on time? We have time. Should we dive into tell the story of waterfall quickly, just to see let's how we maybe got here and how we can get out of this?
Sure.
So, when I say waterfall, does that mean anything to people in the audience? So, So, okay, phase-gated project approach or right, traditional, okay. Phase-gated approach is usually what, so I used to be a project manager too, so I'm gonna say some things that might offend or might rub you the wrong way, but I'm also picking on myself as a former project manager, right? I've had some dark days of project management on those Death March projects, so speaking from that experience. But typically, most organizations have some analysis phase.
Then they do some design. And after design, they do some
Some
kind
type
of
of building.
Yeah, development.
And then, I mean, we shouldn't build something and then just ship it, right? We should probably test it. So we have a test phase. And then eventually, maybe we're gonna have a launch phase down here. Okay? And this probably looks different in your organizations, right? When I worked as a project manager at Fortune 500s, we had things like concept phase, definition phase, planning phase, development phase, testing phase, launch phase, and it was a phase, meaning inside of each phase, you do all your due diligence to get down to this point where you get a blessing or approval to move on to the next phase. That's the idea. And you don't really go back and forth in those phases. Again, you could, but so water flows down, and you normally don't throw water back up a waterfall, so waterfall, right? Everything is just flowing. And now, if this is an organization you were managing or you got hired into, it only makes sense because organizations are made up of people, right? So if we're gonna hire people, we should probably hire some specialized roles to get us through these phases, like business analyst.
Maybe a portfolio architect to do some design, or solution architect. Maybe we got a
programmer analyst, quality assurance specialist. Okay? So we hire some teams and structure our departments by those roles.
Yep.
Okay.
Because that's the most efficient way to do it, right? We put all the people that do these things together so they can learn together and be really, really good at analysis, and really good at design, really good at building and testing, right? And that's the way organizations are inherently structured most of the time. Okay.
So what's wrong with this? I mean, we've said a lot of this already. This is the same story we just talked about. Handoff, integration concerns. If anyone's ever actually been a programmer, there's no easy button where, hey, there's a lot of changes in progress. Let's just hit that easy button and integrate everything so we can ship next week, right? That's not how it works. There's a lot of human conversation that has to happen to integrate code all the time. And the longer the timeline is between integration or code check-ins, if you want to get technical, then the more you have an opportunity to drift apart and cause problems when you push it back altogether. So if time was flowing down here, right, on the y-axis, there's also kind of a question mark of value at the end of this, in my experience, right? I won an award once for delivering a #1 project in the portfolio pretty much on time, pretty much under budget, and I won an award as a project manager, and the customers hated what we delivered, and most people who worked on that project were miserable during and after it. So there's a problem there, right? Because we were chasing time and budget, we were missing out, right? We were missing out on the most important part, scope. Because yes, customers care about time and budget maybe, and we care about budget on the cost side of the equation as organizations, but scope is usually locked down in a phase gate approach, right? We're change resistant. Because Jeff, that feature you asked for last 2 Januaries ago, on page 500 of this business requirements document, you signed off and said that was what you wanted. So, sorry, we're not going to deliver that now. I'm over dramatizing some of this maybe, but I'm getting laughs, which means you maybe have lived some of this. So, time, cost, and scope is what project managers do. Those are dynamic variables, and it's not easy to manage those things throughout any effort. So if we know that this is painful, and we know that there's some way around this, we form cross-functional teams, and we structure them around broad product definitions, what would that look like? Well, if we just take all the skills that are on these teams, right? I'm going to go to a new slide over here. What would that team look like? And I'm going to ignore the roles, the titles, but the skills. We might have some analysis, some coding, some tests, architecture, UX, business specialty, whatever it is, right? Whatever we need. We need all the skills we need to get value out the door quickly. And it's easy, because if you form this team and you're like, hey, we're waiting on something, the writing might be on the wall that you should bring that skill set into your team, or learn that skill set so that you can do it on your own.
So we look at frequency to figure that out, right? So we need legal to look at our terms and conditions on our website or our application. We maybe put that on the outside and we'll coordinate that. We don't need that skill in there. But if I'm developing an insurance product and I need to review that like all the time, maybe I need to pull that lawyer or legal skill set into my team, right? So we're looking at frequency of when we need these things and determine whether they stay on the outside or the inside of the cross-functional team. So this is the reason this is hard for most organizations, because they try to do this thing, but they're inherently organized around managing people. You know, all the analysis people that have that skill set are under one manager, and then all the people that do design are under another manager, and all the people that do building are under another manager, and then all the people that do testing are under another manager, right? And it's easier to manage those types of people, but that's not the best way to produce value if you're slicing into those kind of areas. So oftentimes, even though we say we're not doing waterfall anymore, we still structure Scrum over the top of those kind of areas, and it doesn't really change much. It just puts some lipstick on what we were always doing in the past, back in the traditional waterfall days. So what we're saying here is like, make the big change it to cross-functional, maybe even change your management structure to like, hey, we have leadership around teams, whole teams, and that gives you more of a product-centric, concept to cash delivery, holistic approach to what you're actually doing, and you're focusing on that delivery. You want to jump in?
Yeah. So now we're going to get to the point where the talk title, rationalizing demand and delivery. We had to go through that background to get to this. Otherwise, I think just jumping into it might have been like abrupt. So this is how we work with clients, anybody who really wants to talk about defining their product in a different way. So we talk about demand and delivery. So what does demand look like? Well, you've already seen it. We just talked about it. Demand is where the work comes from. It could be what customer segments, it could be what departments across the organization, but it's essentially where's the work coming from. And where I like to start with people is, where is it today? Let's just map a picture of today. So I'll use an example from insurance companies, because I've worked with a lot of insurance companies. So let's say today this insurance company has some backlogs, some lists, and maybe it's they have a claims, and they have a billing, and they have an enrollment. What's another insurance-related backlog that might exist? That's pretty good for this example. So claims, billing, enrollment. Now, when we talk about delivery, what are we talking about? The teams, the people doing the work. Who does this work today? And so let's say today, in this particular example, there's 3 teams and they're all aligned underneath those lists. So there's a claims team, a billing team, and an enrollment team. So there's clearly some business expertise on those teams. And in this case, this based on a real example, there is also some technical expertise, because some of these were different types of technologies. Okay?
And there was tech in the middle there, right? On this one?
Yeah, so then this is where, when we say rationalizing demand and delivery, this is the part that I think is often overlooked. So sandwiched in between here, what we can't ignore are the system constraints, the technology constraints that we have to work within. So in this case, we ask some questions like, hey, claims and billing team, like how often do you rely on each other? How often if claims, you're working on a piece of code and you check something in to version control, do you step on the toes of the billing team? And let's say in this example, they're like, that happens a lot. This is painful all the time. We're always trying to coordinate. It's like, okay. So then I asked a couple more questions like, do you share a code base? Is it one code base, or do you have separate code bases? And let's say in this case, it's shared code base. So I've just identified that there's some tight coupling from a technology code base standpoint that these teams have to work within. So, what did we say previously? To get to a broad product definition, you collapse lists, right? So if we were to collapse claims and billing into one product, one list, what has happened?
What happens to our dependencies?
We've created more clarity on what the number one is. That's good, but we still might run into each other a lot if we have these separate teams working on that. So what we want to consider is not just collapsing the lists, but restructuring how those teams work because of the constraint, because of this constraint on one code base. There's no easy button to integrate, remember that. So instead of a claims specialty team and a billing specialty team, what if we were to self-organize, get all the people into a room and have them choose their team and create like-sized feature teams? What would that look like? That would mean that in addition to maybe different tech stacks across claims and billing, we would want to split those skills up. So we'd want to put a billing person over here, and we'd want to put a claims person over here, and a claims here, and a billing here. You want to create a team that can deliver anything on this combined list if we were to combine this. Okay? And again, it doesn't happen overnight, but this is why by restructuring your teams, you bake into the DNA of those teams that you have to start learning whatever it takes to deliver the value on that list. So that is demand and delivery, taking into account the technology constraints that exist inside of your product space.
So in this one, then to tie it back to what we talked about in the very beginning, we asked the question, who are your real customers? Like, who does the work we're doing in claims and billing and enrollment, who does it actually serve? Like, who is the end person? We know we got these tech stacks, we know who's delivering it now, we know where our dependencies are, and they start going into it, and maybe they say, in this case it was, hey, we have individual insurance, we sell it to individuals, and then we have insurance that we sell to groups, like large groups that kind of buy these things in packages. Very different ways that we market, very different ways that we sell this, but very similar systems. So in this case, what we decided to do was take cross-functional teams from each of those three areas and divide them into two products, individual and group. And then you have cross-functional teams under each. We split the code base dependency and decouple that. And now they have more agility to adjust on what should we do for group and what should we do for an individual. So it's kind of flipping it into more focus on customers, removing the tech dependency, and focusing on who's delivering it and separating those around the customers that they're actually delivering to, in this example.
And in this based on reality story, what actually happened was 2 new product definitions. The director of IT came in on a day that we were going to do a self-organization activity, said, hey, we put some thought into it. We really think our actual products that people care about and the value we want to deliver is individual insurance policy processing and group. And the director said, I'm not sure if I trust Chad yet, but I'm going to walk out of the room and let him do his thing, and gave the blessing. We talked about cross-functional teams and what a feature team looks like. Management left the room. About an hour and 15, hour and a half later, we went through some facilitation and we had 4 new feature teams. 2 teams under individual, 2 teams under group. All with varying skill sets based on business expertise and technology skill set. So it looked like this. Now, if we wouldn't have the luxury of splitting that code base in this example, it might have made sense to have one backlog for the entire company. Just the list. And have all these teams just pull from that list, because we'd be, and this is key, there'd be an illusion of a product if this was still tightly coupled. Because we still have teams dealing with all these constraints. And so what happens, and you can see this very clearly if you're an outsider looking in on this, what happens is when the skill sets it's not spread out and the code base is split, you continue to have people pull in things lower on the list on the backlog because of who knows whatever reason, instead of everyone across that ecosystem working together every iteration and closing that feedback loop to get stuff out the door as quick as possible. So, where do you want to go next, Jeff? Do you want to highlight the 4 C's?
So we kind of talked about them, but we want to just bring them to the front.
We came up with 4 C's.
4 C's.
This is like
defining your product.
$1 million idea. If we were management consultants at one of the big firms, we just increased our bill rate a lot.
Yeah.
I should be careful not mocking management consulting. Okay.
So, help us figure out. We talked about them. What's one of the C's? Can you think? Help us out. Clarity, collaborative. How about customers? We talked about customers. So focus around your customer. Any other ideas?
This one's harder to get.
Code bases or coupling of your technology.
Coupled code or code coupling. We talked about collapsing the lists. That implies the list to a broad product definition. Right? And then what else?
Cross-functional teams, right?
Silence. It's a terrible idea. They don't like it. We just thought we were trying to come up with. We actually came up with 3 C's, and then we were like, hey, actually, the code coupling is the fourth thing that's very critical. So yeah, this isn't that important. I mean, we're just trying to highlight in a summary. These are things to keep in mind when you're thinking about what you call a product in your organization. Think about the customer. Think about your code and coupling concerns. Think about whether you should collapse some lists together into a broader product definition. And don't forget about cross-functional teams, because they're the people who do the work. This is at the heart of everything. We can play a lot of games with the other things, but at the end of the day, the people have to do the work, and they have to work day in and day out, minute by minute, inside of organizations to create value. So it's very critical. Lastly, talk about the kind of the right-wrong thing.
Oh yes.
Because sometimes we get really passionate up here, and we're like preaching and maybe yelling at you, or like it seems that way sometimes. Or talking about the world, how it's just we're all screwed. So this is not binary, meaning we're not saying that this is right or wrong. Okay? Business and life is about trade-offs. Every decision you make with your time on the planet, and every decision you make as an organization with what you're going to do next, it's a trade-off decision. There's no right or wrong. I mean, maybe if we're getting into ethical things, sure, there's some right and wrong things, but there's no right or wrong here. If you go with a narrow product definition, what I hope the takeaway here today is that you are accepting some trade-offs. And if you are seeking adaptiveness, responsiveness, agility, don't be surprised if it's a painful road to get there if you don't take some of these things into account.
So some things you might see. No one wants to come to my sprint review if you're doing Scrum. Maybe you have a narrow product definition and you're just doing a component and no one really cares about that. They only care about the end thing. It doesn't make sense to do a daily Scrum. We don't actually really work together. Maybe we are just like, we're just a team that just builds many different things. We actually don't work on a holistic product, right? Like that could be something that's happening. If you're using Scrum or you're using some other agile framework, if things don't make sense, it don't seem to work. The sprint goal doesn't really work for us. Whatever it is, maybe you don't have that broad product definition. Maybe you're not thinking about things holistically, and we're not saying it's wrong. We're just saying you're making a choice to focus on efficiency in an area instead of an effective value-driven solution that is responsive and adaptive to change. That's okay if you want something else to optimize for. But if you want to optimize for adaptiveness, responsiveness, and value, think about the broader product definition.
And I drew this spectrum of 0 to 10 of agility because it is squishy. Like I know we all want to know, like when we say things like, hey, our company's going agile, it sounds like there's an end state. Like, yeah, we're agile now. But are you? Because it's 2019 and I guarantee in 2022 or 2030, the world's gonna be moving faster, right? The information age isn't going away unless the solar flare takes everything out. Like, it's not going away. So everything is speeding up. And so I don't think there's an end state to working towards this. I think agility is something that it's a feeling. If you know that, hey, you know, the way we were working 2 years ago, it feels like we're getting stuff out the door a lot quicker now and our customers are happier, then you're probably doing the right thing, and maybe amplify that and keep making decisions to tell that story more. So anyway, I wanted to leave us with a little bit of, I don't know, like a nudge and some hope and not so much negativity, if you felt some of that during the presentation.
Let's do an example.
Yeah, we could do an example. So here's what we've been told. It's 3:51.
Yeah.
This technically ends at 4, but there's also nothing after this. So we won't be offended if you want to leave now. We won't be offended if you leave right at 4. But if you're interested and somebody wants to like raise their hand and like talk us through their ecosystem, we could do an example of rationalizing demand and delivery. And we'll stay as long as people talk to us. That's usually what we do. So how's that sound? I'll leave it at that. Was there any other wrap-up stuff in case people do want to leave? We can just do that stuff and then dive into an example.
Yes, one quick thing. Chad and I are doing 3 professional Scrum courses in October, November, and December. We have a product owner class, a professional Scrum Master 2 class. It's more for Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, that type of stuff, kind of take things to the next level. And then a professional Scrum Foundations class for, hey, maybe things aren't quite working quite right, like let's re-baseline, or you're new to Scrum, new to Agile. Great class for that. So you can check that out at whiteboardconsulting.org and our training site. We've got registration there, or just connect with us on LinkedIn and we can give you more information on it. Is that the last thing? I think that was the only other thing we
Yeah, LinkedIn, if you want to connect, we love connecting with people and just having conversations. If you found any value in today, shoot us a note. If you were like, man, you guys are crazy, that was terrible, shoot us a note. We have thick skin. And yeah, whiteboardconsulting.org is the training. That's all we wanted to talk about.
I think so.
The Agile Wire. So Jeff, who spoke earlier on the Cream City Code stage, they have the Agile Wire podcast, born and raised in Wisconsin here. But they are, I don't know if both of you were born and raised in Wisconsin, but anyway, they have the Agile Wire podcast, and you guys are doing a podcast here, this stage tomorrow at 9 a.m., correct?
Live podcast.
Awesome. Okay, so that's all we have. And if anybody has an example, let's dive in, but no pressure. Yeah. Oh, awesome, we have mics. Yes. Thank you.
What suggestions would you have for teams that also manage against operational work, so they kind of balance their time, and how would you recommend keeping the focus there?
Yep, so we talked about this.
Give me some examples of what those teams are right now. Like, what are the teams that you have that are doing operational stuff?
So I work with non-IT teams, so we primarily work with, if we get calls from the field or our reps at Northwestern Mutual.
Okay.
They have to drop everything and essentially answer questions with that, or any other types of run work that would have to come up with, like new releases with technology, things like that.
Okay, so they're supporting a product that's out there that you currently sell?
Yep. So they'll support like the continuing of running it, but we also are building new things with it.
Okay, and that's a different team building it than the field reps that you?
No, it's the same team that kind of balances both. So
great.
Something that I've been trying to do is get more focus on the build part of it, and how do we, continue to focus on like how do we move the needle on making it better and improving it and making it.
Is it one team that does all the work today?
Yes.
So there's one team, and they pull from one list or 2 lists. Like there's field support work that comes in, like emergency stuff, unknowns, and then we want to build new stuff.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
And do you have it separated into 2 lists today?
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Okay.
So this is a great example of maybe there's an illusion here, right? There's an illusion that there's 2 lists because it's the same people you said doing all this, right?
Correct.
How many people?
12.
12. Okay.
So you have 12 people here, but they pull from 2 lists. So whether we talked about technology constraint earlier, but this is a people constraint. that I guess we didn't highlight, but this is a great example. So in this case, I would just say merge those lists. And then again, it's about trade-offs. Find someone, whether you're using Scrum or not, find a decision maker who's going to manage the new combined list, and day in and day out, or however often you want to work on iterations. Maybe it's a pull system and you pull something in on a daily basis, but someone makes the decision on what is at the top of this list.
The other thing you might want to do with your stakeholders, because they're gonna look at it and be like, field and support, it just has to happen. I want these new features, or at least that's commonly what I see happen. You might want to make it very transparent how much time you're spending on field and support, how much time you're spending on new features, maintenance, bugs, things like that, just in a percentage, and just talk about that. Maybe every sprint, maybe every month. Like, what does that look like, and are we okay with what it is? It might be like really, really heavy on the field and support, and that's okay if you're a very mature product and you're making a conscious decision, but maybe you don't want to spend that much time on that, and maybe you want to spend more on the products. But if you make that very transparent that, hey, we're only spending 20% of our time on the new features, and so when you give us $1 million for a whole entire year, we're only spending 200,000 of that on the new features. 800,000 of that's going to other stuff. Just know what you're getting. You're only investing this much onto this portion that you want the new features from. So I think it just helps you to have that clarity and transparency on what's actually happening, and then you can make conscious decisions.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Anyone else? Yeah. Maybe we get the microphone over there too. So I probably won't be able to hear you.
Thanks. Hi.
Hello.
Okay. So here's the situation. We have a company that has, let's say, 10 different lists, 8 developers, and 1 PO.
Okay.
So we have, and our lists are organized by clients.
Okay.
And you mentioned collapsing the lists and focusing on what you want to optimize for.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what it is, like different types of optimizations? And then, I mean, I guess my next question then is, let's say we collapse all those lists.
Yep.
I wouldn't even know how to put that into a big picture and organize that time by client, because they're also purchasing based on a service level, right? So one client might be 10 hours a week and another client might get 40 hours a week.
Sure. But you're telling me that there's a constraint that there's 8 people who do all this work.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, it feels right to, this is the start, this idea that we think by starting everything, we're gonna get done earlier. And so we give clients that same message. Like, we heard you, we've received your request. But then it might sit on one of those lists for quite a while, right? And again, depending on how much they're paying for time to work on that.
Right.
But imagine if you collapse that to one list, still take those different contracts for each client into consideration, but instead this one list now becomes a thematic backlog based on your clients and the time that you've set. And the product owner then decides, hey, we haven't hit, the 20 hours this month we said we were gonna do for client A, so I'm gonna move this up the list. And you simplify all the noise for the 8 people, and they just pull from the top of the list.
So you got that 40-hour one. Like, one way to do it would be to be like, well, let's do 8 hours, 5 weeks in a row until we get to the 40 hours, and that's going to be how we spend the time. Or we could give them all the features. Maybe we do that in the first 3 days with multiple people, and we deliver them a bunch of functionality. They get the value sooner. We then can work on the next one, and we have more focus on the next thing, and we don't context switch. We don't lose that focus. You don't have all these like lagging meetings that just kind of like drag on, and that just add to a lot of waste in your system.
So, can you tell me a little bit more of the optimization part?
Yep. So in this case, you might be optimizing for getting everything started. You might be optimizing for giving a status update and like the appearance that we're working on your problem, and maybe it's even that's what you're trying to do. And
You're shaking your head. So do clients feel that? Like, you're working on you started it, but I'm wondering why it's not done yet?
So there are situations where perception is sometimes what we're working for. Because there's just this mass backlog, multiple backlogs and time spread and the number of people to do those things, right? So it's perception of, yes, Mr. Customer, I know, about this issue and we have it on our backlog and I have a couple questions, and then, you might then move on to the next thing. So it's also managing perception.
Yeah, and this is why product ownership in Scrum, product owner is a big role. The word owner is not taken lightly by the people who came up with Scrum. There's a lot of big, heavy decisions to make in this ecosystem when you have all these clients, right? But it happens all the time. I get angry about things that don't work on my phone. But if I'm a low frequency complainer, I don't expect that it's going to resolve right away. But if there's a security flaw with iPhone updates, they're going to take care of that right away. So, we can't bend space and time yet to create more time to get things done. So that just means trade-offs. Some clients are going to have to wait, and the better relationship you can build with them by being as open and transparent as you're comfortable with.
Yep.
And then again, this one list could be sliced and diced. In a simple Google Sheet or Excel, you can have client name, and if you have calls with your clients, you just go filter by that client, and then you can look. And you can tell them, you know what? Based on the severity of what you're asking for and our other things we're working on right now, we don't have that in our next iteration. So it's not a no, but it's a not right now. And so you don't give them the illusion that you've started on it.
And what we keep thinking is you really want to optimize for, generally, I'm assuming what you want is more throughput and probably shorter cycle times. From when I start something to finish something, I want that to be shorter.
Yeah.
And if you want that, you need to limit your work in progress. There's a direct correlation to the amount of things that you have that you're working on and your throughput and your cycle time. The more stuff you work on, the longer it takes to get everything done, the less you actually get done over a period of time.
This
if you
is
work on
Little's
less,
law.
Little's law. If you work on less, the opposite's true. Your throughput goes up and your cycle time gets shorter. It's very, very, it seems counterintuitive, but it works every single time. I was working with a Kanban team recently, walked in, the thing they were missing on Kanban is whip limits across the top, right? And they had 60 things in progress for 7 people. They're getting about 5 things done a week to production, so they're still getting some stuff done. All we did is we got that thing down to 15 things in progress at a time, and their throughput doubled to 10, and their cycle time went to 12 to 14 weeks to 1 to 2 weeks. Their customers were ecstatic. The people that doing the work were like, oh my gosh, I can actually think and focus on something. Like, it feels like a weight's been lifted off my shoulders. I can go home and just relax. It was just the best thing in the world for everyone. And all we did is limit the work in progress, right? So that would be my nudge to you. You're gonna do one thing, you're gonna, to get to flow, limit your work in progress and start with collapsing your list and then doing that on top of it.
Yeah. So one follow-up question. What is the average or acceptable number of teams per PO?
So there's a cognitive limitation for a product owner, a single person. They can only handle so many things on a list and ordering them. And at a certain point, number 50 and number 51 they sound the same. I don't know which one's more important. Whatever, they're close. It's in that ballpark.
Yeah.
And so you have to make trade-offs, and the trade-off generally is the development teams want to break things down into smaller pieces, but a product owner wants them in bigger chunks so I can actually make ordering decisions easier. And so if you break those things into bigger chunks, you can have more teams, and then when you pull them into a sprint, if you're doing Scrum, you can break that down into smaller things. So a rule of thumb, if you can get it to let's just say 4 or 5 things that you're pulling in for each team for a sprint, you may be able to get to 7 to 9 teams underneath one product owner.
Yeah.
That's the most that I've ever seen. I've never seen it go over more than 9, and that's not what any of the scaling frameworks that are out there, they won't recommend more than that. But if you've only ever done 1, go to 2 or 3, but remember what you need to do. You need to shrink, you need to get those items to be bigger and less items taking into each sprint, because if you want 2 or 3 sprints of runway for each team, okay, so we have 3 teams, 4 things for each team, that's 12 per sprint. I want 3 sprints, that's 36 items, well refined. And then I need some bigger items after that need to break down every sprint to keep that continuous process going. And that's doable for a product owner. And once they're like, I feel okay about that, I can add a 4th team or a 5th team, and then you can start doing that.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Rough guideline, 8 teams is getting pretty big.
It's a lot, yeah.
I think you sort of answered this one already.
So if you have a larger organization, and right now we're set up very waterfall,
okay.
So we end up with a lot of the similar situations you've spoken about here. A lot of inter-team dependencies, and we're waiting on somebody else to achieve something. When you have a large organization like that, let's say 100 total people in IT, all working on various projects, some ERP related, some other products that are more like web and that, how do you start to break out that product ownership? What does that look like?
So you said, did you say an IT organization of 100 people?
Yeah, right around that.
Yep.
Right now we're trending towards taking a product and outsourcing it to a third party, and then the limited team that we do have is sort of handling that management kind of.
How many people do you have internally still right now?
Under 100, but like over 80, something like that,
Okay.
80, 90.
And how
Not
are
all
those
developers.
How are those teams structured?
Based on, so there's like a web CRM team. There's a
By system, it sounds like.
by system, yeah, definitely.
Yep, and that's a
So
very
it's
common
ERP,
thing.
Yep, exactly.
It's very common. But like our example before, where we had like billing and claims and whatever, there were
Yep.
multiple systems that each of them did, and they might have been organized around that before. What do you sell to the product or to a customer? It's not. Do you sell the ERP? Do you sell the web?
No, we're definitely a manufacturer, and
Okay.
we have that manufacturing mindset. So IT is very different to the organization. They're wrapped up under finance, and so that's another challenge that we have. So we're not seeing IT, even though a lot of other IT companies now are seen as the product you're selling the value all around the product. You know, what is it? Amazon isn't a merchandising company, they're an IT company that happens to sell products, right? One of those products is stuff from Amazon.com. Another product is compute in the cloud. So when thinking about that, how do you start to restructure sort of that old school?
Those sound like two product areas that you just listed out, like what you're actually selling, and then like, are there systems that overlap between those 2 products? That's your next question to ask yourself.
Right.
And if there are, then can we decouple them, or are we living in a world where they are tightly coupled and we can't do anything about that yet?
Yeah, that's interesting. So
Do you still run projects? You have a portfolio of projects?
Yeah, we no longer have a PMO, but we have all of the legacy from having a PMO, if that makes sense.
So we
still have to fill out a 20-page form to move everything through our process.
Yep.
There's still stage gates and that kind of stuff.
So across 80 to 100 people, you have a portfolio of projects up here,
Right.
prioritized by project.
Yep.
And then do you still form project teams to work on it?
Yes.
And do resource management where someone's time, so I'll get to draw this guy.
Yep.
This happy little knowledge worker here, right? He's just a happy knowledge worker.
Right.
And then we assign him to 5 projects.
Right.
And he just turns into this horrified, because we're taking a human brain and we're doing this to it. I mean, that's what we're doing when we assign someone across multiple projects.
I'm currently on like 5 major projects.
No blame here. Just this is an observation of what we're doing. So it's painful. It's not effective for the organization.
Right.
So to bring focus back to our first question is sort of, okay, you've got 80 to 100 people and you've got some back office support systems that are sort of table stakes for organizations like accounting software, ERP, CRM. That's not a differentiator for you, right?
Right.
Everybody has a CRM, unless you're selling a CRM. That's your product, like Salesforce.
Right.
Okay, so basically that stuff, maybe organize that around the product because it's probably contained. So there's not probably a lot of coupling between the ERP system and your web page.
Right.
But maybe there is. So here's what I would look at. Look at your project teams and try to look for a pattern where when you assemble a project team, do you almost always have to take a person from here, and those teams? If most of your project portfolio at a high frequency is pulling people from those teams, the writing's on the wall that you should take that skill set, form a long-lived, stable, cross-functional team,
Right.
and then give them a list to work from.
So,
And then replicate that across the IT department, and then you might not get it right away, but you can watch the frequency at which dependencies occur then across those new product areas, and then continue to collapse as those dependencies need to be resolved.
So I think we're trying to do that, which is great. That's what we said we're going to do, but being an organization that hasn't done that, we've been talking about doing this for like 2 years, so I haven't seen a lot of progress, and therefore that's why my question is sort of around who's the product owner in that case? Is it one single person managing that gigantic product backlog, helping to make that decision?
Yeah, the product owner is the CEO of that product. And so whether you are a one-person startup or you are a 5,000 person organization, you have one CEO. So you need to have one essential decision maker in that system. Now, as you start merging lists, you need less product owners, right?
Right.
But maybe some of those product owners go onto the team to help support that product owner because they have specialized skills in other things. So, but there's still one person that's accountable for making those value decisions and validating value delivery. So you got to figure out who that is in your organization. There's lots of things to look into. We could, talk to you more about that offline. Probably about here's the criteria I would be looking for to figure that out.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yep. And one of the most painful pieces of that is the org chart, because org charts in 2019 are not agile. It takes a long time to change and move teams around. If we remove that constraint and just say, hey, we're going to try something new in the IT area with 80 to 100 people, let's get in a room, talk about our pain of dependencies with the people who actually do the work, and let's form some new product areas. And then you've removed a huge constraint, and you can try an experiment for a while, inspect, look for patterns, and then try something new again. But we have this idea in most hierarchical organizations that we have to really come up with the right plan for the new org chart, and so we just kill our agility. And we kill our innovation because of that, because we don't ever have a chance. Sorry,
No, totally.
Org charts not changing quickly is a major impediment to this.
Yeah,
So
they
it will be painful if your organization is like that.
It is.
Yeah. But not impossible. Is that it? Guitar playing.
Ooh, do we have a guitar? He'll play a song.
There's no guitar. If you want guitar playing, you have to bring a guitar. I don't bring my own. I mean, I could have, but I didn't.
I was trying to nudge Chad. He's got a Scrum parody song, Old Scrum Road, that he did recently. I was telling him he should have brought it. He did it.
Yep. Maybe next time.
Yep.
All right, thanks everybody. The people who stayed until the end, awesome.